In Sway, a function is either pure or impure. The difference between a pure and an impure function is that a pure function does not read from storage, and an impure function does read data from the storage. So let's take a look at some examples. Here I've declared two functions, add and add with storage val. And I've also declared a storage variable called num. So let's take a look at an example of a pure function. So here, inside here, I have a function called add. It's going to take in two inputs, u64 of x and u64 of y. Okay, this function is going to return another u64, so we'll just return x plus y. Now, notice that this function does not read any data from the storage. The variable we have declared inside the storage is num. This is the only storage variable, and inside this function add, we did not access this data num. So this is why this function is a pure function. How about an impure function? Let's take a look at an example. So here I have a function called add with storage val. And now notice that on top of this function declaration, it declares something else. It declares storage read. So this already signals that this function is impure because it's going to read some data from the storage. Okay, so let me give you a concrete example of an impure function. So again, as a reminder, an impure function will read something from the storage. For example, let's say storage.num, and let's add 1 to this storage variable and then return the result. So what it's going to do is read the value stored in storage.num, add 1, and then return it. And this is an example of an impure function. Again, why is it called impure? Because it's going to read some data from the storage. Okay, let's try compiling the contract. Inside the terminal, I'll type fork build, and our contract compiled. Now, why should you care whether a function is pure or impure? Well, from my experience, pure functions are easier to understand, they're also easier to test and debug. This is because the output of a pure function only depends on the input. And the opposite can be said for impure functions. Since the output or the effect of an impure function depends on the state variables, you may pass in the same exact input but get a different answer depending on the data stored inside the storage. So, impure functions are a little bit more difficult to test, understand, and also debug. If you can't write your functions as pure functions, you'll have an easier time testing and understanding the code.